when we talk about classical yoga, we're talking about following, especially those tenets, like we're talking about, as I said, reincarnation, karma, but we're also talking about the 8 limbs. So we're talking about yama, niyama, we're talking about pranayama, asana, pratyahara, dharana, jhana, samadhi. So those 8, and it's a complex system to actually unpack. So when you look at the first 2 limbs, like if you look at yama, niyama, like you're talking about, yama is like your external moral obligations in the world. You know what I mean? So how you should act morally in society. So it's giving you sort of from the beginning, it's giving you like a kind of a moral template of how to behave yourself, how to behave yourself. And then the niyama is actually how to, the internal moral obligations is about how to, implement them and to make them more firm in you so that you can become a virtuous person. So within those we see all sorts of things, like we see, brahmacharya, we see brahmacharya meaning making sure you eat all your meals at home, having sexual restraint, so like not becoming like, someone who's out, a booze hound who's out on a Friday and Saturday night womanizing, none of that. But it's about brahmacharya can also, you can become a brahmacharya also in marriage, but your sexual life has to be, restricted, and it has to be more pure. So it has to be more about, it's more love-based instead of the animal drives kind of kicking in, which can still happen in married couples, So you have that. You also have Ahimsa, and Ahimsa Ahimsa means non-harming. A lot of people confuse Ahimsa with vegetarianism and veganism. That makes up, a small part of it, but it's not the totality of it. Because when we talk about Ahimsa, we mean also trying not to harm with our way of thinking too. So you don't want to cultivate hatred for people or groups.
So within even our thoughts.
Even within our thoughts,
right.
Yeah.
Not just action.
Not just
harming other people outwardly.
That's only half of it. Yeah.
Right.
The inward part is probably more so important, because if you have that in check, you're not going to outwardly attack.
Naturally,
yeah. Because you're working on yourself, right? You're working on trying to cultivate harmonious dispositions in yourself. So trying to get rid of hatred, trying to not be as angry, trying to cultivate compassion, love, forgiveness.
That's very challenging.
Challenge for everyone, right? That's the big challenge we all have, because we've all been socialized and we've been taught by unintelligent teachers most of our life, be that our educational system or directly through our family or friends or what have you. So there is all of that. So Ahimsa makes up a part. There's so many parts of yama niyama to talk about. But again, they are only the beginning of the yogic system. Obviously, greed plays a part in those first 2. So you need to have greedlessness. You can't be doing things for yourself. You can't be self-interested. It's trying to teach you how that actually brings you back to accord with yoga. And to be specific, yoga means, if we look at the root Sanskrit, yug, means to unite or connect with the divine. And that brings up an interesting thing within the niyama system, because one of the fifth niyama is Ishvara Pranidhana. And Ishvara Pranidhana means, we could translate as like worship of the Lord, or worship of God, or what have you. And then the interesting thing about that is because when you look at yoga being a strictly dualistic system, Patanjali's sort of thrown that in there. And you could probably, a lot of people always ask me, like, can we interpret yoga as a non-dualist system? And I say yes, but you have to understand it in some different sort of ways, you know what I mean? But Ishvara Pranidhana is kind of like Patanjali's way of saying that the idea of yoga is to unite with Brahman. He uses the term Ishvara here, and Ishvara is usually used as a term for Brahman. So a lot of the debate, as Andrew Nicholson talks about, is what Ishvara is he talking about here? Is he talking about Vishnu or is he talking about Shiva? Like, what is the text talking about? So, and that's a hotly debated topic between Vaishnavas and Shaivas. So basically it applies to both. You can just, Ishvara means either or. I think that the reason why Patanjali used that specific term is because he didn't want to get into the debate of, which god is greater than...
That's not the point, because...
No, that's not the point. That's not the point of yoga, so I think he used a pretty neutral term for that. So, though we could say definitely from a Shaiva perspective, if we look, when people do think of yoga, they think of Shiva as God, right? Or Shiva as Brahman, I should say. You go to the Ganga, you go to Varanasi, you go to Arunachala, you go to Pashuputanath in Kathmandu. So you go to all these places, and they're Shaiva places. They're not Vaishnava places, even though a Vaishnava would go there to worship too. This is a beautiful thing about India, as you know, like your God is my God, is his God, it doesn't matter. There's not a very strict, there's not a strict division that much between Shaivas and Vaishnavas. So he put that in there, and so then you got that idea of Ishvana Pranidhana. So the role of following, part of the roles of following the yamas and niyamas is to come back into union with Brahman. And how do we do that? Well, that's where the other limbs come in, So we practice asana, so we learn posture. We learn how to, and as we talked about before, we learn how to sit, in the royal posture, so to speak. And also we learn pranayama, so we learn how to control our breath. And the importance of controlling the breath is because the ancient way of thinking, and basically the way it is that when we control our breath, it has a significant impact on the mind, So when we do deep breathing exercises, your mind naturally becomes calm. When you follow the breath naturally in Vipassana and these sorts of techniques, your mind naturally becomes calm. It may take time sometimes, especially if you have a lot of turbulence in your life. But it will eventually. And so pranayama is very important as well. And then that's where it gets into probably the deeper elements. The last 4 limbs of yoga are probably the most important. But it's such an expert lifestyle system, because if you don't understand the first 4, it's hard to understand the last 4. And so pratyahara being, in the 8 limbs, right? Pratyahara being the 4th, is like the gate to the inner limbs.
Next 4 limbs.
The next limbs. So the first one. So you've got yama, niyama, pranayama, asana. Sorry, it's the 5th one. Sorry, pratyahara being the 5th, and the inner limbs are the last 3. So dharana, jhana, samadhi. So pratyahara being the control of the senses. So the withdrawal of the senses, I should say, and that goes in many ways too. It comes to sensory, to your ears, everything like. So it's a complete withdrawal of senses, because what that does is when you withdraw your senses, as you know from being a long-term meditator, when you withdraw your senses from the external world, you come back more into harmony, or you come back with inside yourself, and that's when you can begin to work on a deeper level. So we technically have, as Patanjali pointed out, and as other great sages pointed out before him and after him, is we technically have a concentration problem in the world, is what we have. So you remember the days being a kid when your mum's hitting you, your dad's going, "Oi, focus, concentrate," and you don't even know. You don't know how to, and they also don't know how to. You've never been taught. And so what meditation is basically a method of teaching you how to concentrate. And especially yoga is a method of teaching you how to concentrate. And the reason why concentration here being dharana, being the sixth limb. Why it's important is because that's what leads into the deeper levels of meditative absorption, jhana, and also samadhi. So when we look at dharana being, you need an object still of meditation for dharana. So you're experiencing vipassana. So in vipassana, the awareness of the breath, the awareness of senses, these are objects of meditation, not an actual object, like just like an anchor for your meditation. And this helps cultivate concentration. And so, as you know from being a long-term meditator, staying in monasteries for a long time, the longer you stay and the longer you cultivate concentration, the deeper you can go into your mind and into your meditation to what in yoga they call meditative absorption, jhana. So where the object of meditation disappears, or you become one with the object of meditation, I should say. So the subject becomes the object, or the object becomes the subject, you see. And that's what jhana is. Jhana is that single-pointed concentration without... It's the perfection of concentration. It should be actually translated as the perfection of concentration, in some sense, because that's what it is. Jhana is the perfection of your concentration.
Such the clarity, you can get it from doing meditation. Yeah,
definitely.
Really deep level of concentration, focus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's how you get into jhana. But then obviously when you're in jhana, when you have absorbed into that, the subject-object, that perfected concentration, that's where the sense of subject-object disappear. And that's what samadhi is. Samadhi is people say contemplation or contemplative ecstasy or transcendent ecstasy. Ecstasy, Georg Fursten uses ecstasy, right, as a translation, but he does clarify that we're not talking about like trip and like this. We're talking about like a transcendental ecstasy, like it's an ecstatic state because you're not the person anymore.